Good evening, I'm Gerg Cahiles sitting in for Pinky Web. Tonight, we ask the questions, we tackle the issues, we clarify matters, and we get on point. The history of the Bangsamoro is as beautiful as it is violent. Alongside the rich and colorful traditions of the Muslim people of Mindanao is the bloody struggle of the Moro for self-determination. Decades of armed conflict with government and brutal wars among clans have left much of Mindanao behind, but the struggles are finally paying off. The Moro armies have laid down their arms, autonomy has been granted, and self-rule is slowly taking shape. But people who have witnessed and participated in the transformation of Mindanao know all too well that while guns may have now been silenced, the struggle for lasting peace and meaningful progress is far from over. Let's get on point with former presidential advisor on the peace process, Teresita Ging. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, George, and good evening to all our viewers.
Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Firstly, tell us the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. Tell us your struggles. It's not an easy task, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a long and vicious armed conflict, which roots are long before our remembered history.
Yes.
But finally, peace talks did start. It was very long and protracted. Two armed fronts actually had fought, the MNLF, which signed the final peace agreement in 1996, and then the MILF, where finally, after several rounds of protracted talks, which experienced many violent outbreaks, vicious outbreaks. At one point, we had more displaced people than Eastern Europe at that time, and but we in 2014
Yes.
finally signed the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro, which brought to an end 4 decades of armed conflict and 17 years of negotiations. On the political settlement being the highest form of autonomy that the country could give under the Constitution, because our Constitution does recognize that there are 2 regions in the country which may be granted autonomy because of a different history, a different narrative. And it took, after 2014, it took till 2019, 5 years before the law that put the agreement into legal form, made it a legal reality, was passed. 2 more years before and then the plebiscite.
Plebiscite, that's
and which was passed in 2019, and which started a transition period because, of course, moving from what was to that highest form of autonomy was not something that would happen overnight. There needed to be a transition. Institutions needed to be changed. As I hope many would know, it's a different form of government there, the parliament. So that needs some transition time. The transition was supposed to have ended in 2022. But because of, primarily because of COVID, certain tasks were not finished. An extension was legally, it amended the law so that elections are supposed to happen next year, 2025. This is supposed to end the transition with the elections. It will now become a regular parliament because during the transition period, it was an appointive parliament appointed by the president under MILF leadership.
Before we go to the current situation, ma'am, as leading the negotiations with the MILF before, what was the hardest part of it, ma'am? maybe you could share an anecdote or two that you will always remember.
Well, of course, the hardest part was starting no? In this last phase, in 2010 to 2016 under President Pinoy. Because this was coming from the outbreak following the failed Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain,
That's right.
which had promised charter change. And the Supreme Court ruled just at the brink of the signing of that agreement, the Supreme Court ruled that that was unconstitutional because of the process. You can't change a constitution by promising through a peace agreement. It would have to go through its the way the Constitution says that the Constitution may be changed. And there was a major, maybe one of the most vicious outbreaks of violence, when the violence extended beyond the Muslim Mindanao. There was bombing in Davao, there was bombing in Cagayan de Oro, great displacement. So a lot of skepticism when President Aquino said, we will find a just solution to this problem.
But we're seeing the fruits right now, ma'am.
We are seeing it. I think a major indicator is the drop in poverty incidents.
Yes.
Still the lowest in the country because they are starting from such a low baseline because of 4 decades of conflict,
Fighting, yes.
4 decades.
So slowly, we're seeing progress.
I think it would be hard to find anyone who does not agree that there has been an improvement of life of the people because of the peace agreement. Schools have stayed open. Unlike before, where periodically you would have an outbreak of conflict, schools would be stopped, harvests would,
Displacements, right?
there are now some of the conflicts, in fact, that are arising now is because of land. And people are saying, because now the land is productive, it's worth fighting. If people are now fighting about the land.
I'm not saying that it's a good
No,
fighting,
no,
but it's an indicator.
It's an indicator that now the land may be cultivated. It is being harvested. So yes, the indicators still have a long way to go. Socioeconomic indicators still have a long way to go. But people will talk about a relative an enjoyment of, people will still say a relative peace. It's still not the peace that we all dream of safety and security for everyone, but a marked difference from what was.
It's going to be a long run, but we'll take a short break. We will be back. I will have more discussion with Secretary Ging. Welcome back. You're watching On Point. So with us, former presidential advisor on the peace process, Secretary Ging. Ma'am, BARM is supposed to hold its first parliamentary elections. What are you expecting to happen?
Well, the expectation until a few weeks ago, until last week, until a few days back,
Yes.
was that, the elections would happen together with the national elections. In this part of the country, you will not just have the national elections for the senators and the congresspersons in the House of Representatives. You would also have the elections for the local governments, mayors and governors. But there would be one layer of elections that is not happening anywhere else in the country, and that is for regional government. Parliamentary, which means it will be different. We were considering how much work needed to be done, even just to understand how those elections are going to happen. Because the the parliament itself, the Bangsamoro parliament is a different
Setup, probably.
setup,
Oh.
very different setup. There are 80 representatives, 40 of which are voted by party list. So the majority are going to be by party list. And then there are district representatives,
yes.
just as we vote our congressional representatives. And then there are at least 8 reserved seats for marginalized sectors, for the religious, for settlers, for youth, for women.
Would that be elected as well, ma'am? Or
In a different way, at least in these first elections, they're not going to be voted on the ballot. They are going to be voted through sectoral assemblies. So it's different elections, and a big worry already at that time was how are we going to make sure this is understood
by the people?
by the people?
Yes.
The presidential form, then they were voting directly for the governor of the region. There was already regional elections before, but now they're voting for
The parliament.
parliament. District representatives by name, but 40 representatives whom they will vote by voting a party, not a name of a person.
Well, that will be very interesting if we'll be seeing it next year. But here comes what you were saying earlier, this development, the Supreme Court deciding that Sulu be excluded in BARM. Your thoughts, please.
Well, it was a very long decision, no? Which part of what had been filed before the Supreme Court had said that parts, if not all of the BOL was unconstitutional.
Yes.
And as far as that went, the Supreme Court said no, it is constitutional. BARM as BARM stands legally, firmly, no more constitutional challenges. But it did change one thing. The Bangsamoro Organic Law had said that the provinces that constituted the now defunct autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao ARM would vote as one, meaning to say everyone would vote, and if the yes won, then all 5 provinces would come together, would be part of the BARM, and that had been applied. But the Supreme Court said no, because one province did not vote yes by a small margin in Sulu. No one over the yes. It said it could not be part. It could not be part of BARM.
But it's kind of interesting, especially the timing, ma'am, when big political clans of BARM already rallied behind Sulu Governor Abdu Sakurtan to run as Chief Minister of BARM, no, in this coming parliamentary election. What do you think?
Well, I talked to legal people, no, and the judgment itself they feel is completely sound. The ponente, Associate Justice Marvic Leonen, he writes long.
Yes.
He writes long
and
decision.
beautifully.
and yeah, people will say, if you read that decision, you will know the whole history
Yes.
of BARM. So I can believe it took that long. Of course, it causes problems because it comes so close to elections. On the other hand, you also ask, because the case was filed by the son of Governor Sakurtan. And he was, as people already knew, was preparing to run under the party, under his party, and with the coalition, that they would have enough members in the parliament to be able to elect him as the chief minister. Parang if you ask why that timing, you will also ask what also happened here. That the son filed a case
Yes.
raising those questions, and it was always possible
That it will be granted.
that it would be granted. Some part of it would be agreed to. So just as the question of timing is asked, I also ask what happened here.
That's true.
And any answer we give is purely speculative.
Exactly. But currently, since Sulu Governor Abdul Sacortan is already out in the picture, who's gonna challenge the MILF now?
That's what people are watching for. We know that all of the parties have had to hold caucuses, including the Grand Coalition, the Bangsamoro Grand Coalition, which was composed of parties of many of the dominant political families, just as UBJP. At the moment, as an observer, we cannot see someone taking the place of, let's just put it that way, taking the place of Governor Tan.
Okay. Now, I'm thinking about the MILF. Is Chief Minister Morad Ibram still, can he still hold his power? Will he be re-elected and take the topmost position in the parliament?
I think the question is he still able to hold the group? I think yes. And I think perhaps no one else would have been able to hold it as he has. 5 years really unchallenged. I mean, respected.
But there are rumors about infightings among members of the MILF or the political party. What can you say about that?
Okay, there is talk that there are political differences because I raised that because there's also talk about the skirmishes that are happening on the ground, and that's different. That's different. That's happening over other types of conflicts. Now, the way I see it, that should not be that surprising. That 10 years after an agreement was made, ilang taon na ito ngayon, we're going to
Around
since the law was passed 2019.
Yes, so around 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5
yes,
years.
roughly.
4 or 5 years of having ruled in an appointive capacity. That if a group like that was able to consolidate, really, the Bangsamoro people, a constituency to cross ethnic divides, to cross geographic divides, to cross cultural,
Political?
the political divides for the fight for self-determination, that they begin to see that they may have differences in the way they want to run the
government. Yes.
to run the government, how they see the future,
That's true.
where they're going to be putting emphasis on. For me, that should not come as a surprise, and it's not necessarily bad. And that maybe it's necessary for a revolutionary organization, having reached this particular point, to begin to think in other terms now, not because they had there was a government to fight for self-determination, or this big threat to
Security.
That's no longer there.
It's a good sign already.
It's not necessarily bad. What would be bad if they took those differences and started to use violence again?
Again. All right.
To use political tools, to use the political platform to make your idea, your vision, what you're offering, ascendant over somebody else, that's not necessarily bad. And if the UBJP breaks up into many parties, that, for me, that's democracy.
It's okay for as long as they do not take up their arms again.
Yes.
All right. Meantime, we'll hold that idea first, ma'am. We're taking a short break. Stay tuned. This is On Point. Welcome back. You're watching On Point. I'm Gerg Cahiles. Still with us, former presidential advisor on the peace process, Secretary Ging. Ma'am, there are moves to postpone the BARM elections. Your thoughts?
Yes. A bill was filed in the Senate, and a bill was filed also in the House. They're a bit different. The Senate seeks to postpone elections to 2026, while the one in the House that I read said we need more time to settle all of these issues that are still pending. Which, well, eventually, maybe it all ends up to the same thing, that there will be a postponement of elections.
But do you agree that it should be postponed? Kasi ang contention, or what Secretary Galvez is saying, is that we need time to resolve the problems with Sulu. Do you agree?
What I would look for is what exactly and how exactly and how much time and how. When the elections were postponed in 2022, when the term was extended, that was the position of me and some others, that if it was going to be postponed, make sure that there is a clear roadmap. What exactly needs to happen that did not happen in the initial period. So you got 3 years of extension. The new thing here now is Sulu. Okay, what exactly are the issues that have been raised by that? We know that there are 7 parliamentary seats that should go to Sulu. We know that there are regional employees of the BARM in Sulu that will lose their jobs.
Din po yun,
so there are issues. Now, what kind of resolution does that need? There's also an MR in the Supreme Court. So they say it may not be settled. The Supreme Court may still overturn itself, but I don't think it's ever happened with a unanimous vote. So whatever it is, I think there needs to be clarity. Exactly what are these? What will it need? What sort of resolution will that need? How much time will that take? And then sell that to Congress.
Okay.
Sell that to Congress.
If it will be postponed, what is your idea? Should the BTA continue ruling, or should another appointment must happen?
Well, because if you're looking at if it's resolving Sulu, I don't think that will take 3 years. I think maybe 1 year should be good. Maybe even 6 months would be good. I mean, tell me exactly what the issues are and what the resolution is. I don't see it going beyond 1 year. That being the case, and with very clear targets of what needs to be done, it's hard to be convinced. It's hard to think that you would want to change the parliament. I mean, if you really want to solve those problems as quickly as possible,
there should be continuity.
Yes, do a holdover.
Okay.
So I think the bills call for, now I'm not so sure here, but when people are talking about it, it's for an appointment of a new parliament. You know what that will mean. That takes time. You will have people jockeying again for to be appointed.
And probably chaos in the part of
So for me, this move needs a lot of clarity. Is it to resolve the Sulu issue? There was also mentioned that certain codes needed to be perfected, security issues, decommissioning the normalization needed to be completed.
Yeah, kasi po currently nakikita natin yung numbers, medyo malaki-laki pa yung hahabulin ng decommissioning, 7,000 this year and another 7,000 next year. And definitely that will be another issue to tackle. But for the meantime, thank you very much po, Secretary Ging. I hope we can invite you again some other time. And that's On Point. Join us again on Monday at 7:30 p.m. here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel. I'm Gerg Cahiles on behalf of PinkyWeb. Thank you for watching.